to welcome now David Sampson, who's the executive publisher from Elsevier. David spent time living and working in China and Hong Kong, and now works out of the Philadelphia office from Elsevier. But David and I have worked on a number of different China sessions and things, and we've really, I think, put together a good base of knowledge. So here you go, David. Thanks.
Philadelphia is not China, that's for sure. Before I start, I just want to get a show of hands to find out the representation in this room in terms of, are you from medical publishers or science and technical publishers, social science? How many here are from or are responsible for medical publications or health science publications? Okay. And how many science and technology? All right. And social sciences? Okay. I want to make sure that my presentation tries to address all of your different needs rather than focusing on my background, which is primarily in medical and health sciences publishing. So as Adrian said, I'm an executive publisher at Elsevier, and I am responsible for a portfolio of journals in various specialties. I did spend about 6 years working in Hong Kong for Wolters Kluwer, late 90s to mid 2000, and I was responsible primarily for sales and marketing, but also some local publishing initiatives in the region. And in between, I worked for a technology startup. So gives you kind of an overview of my qualifications for being up here speaking to you. So my presentation really is going to focus on submissions, output, impact of Chinese research. I'm also going to talk about author motivations in China for publishing and how that has led to perhaps some ethics issues that I think many of you here have experienced and seen. I'm going to build on what Laura has introduced in her presentation and talk about the overview of the publishing industry, some of the drivers for the changes that Laura mentioned in the publishing industry in China. And then also, just to conclude, talk about some of the policy drivers in China that's leading to the growth in output as well as impact of papers in China. So before I start, I also wanted to let everyone know that these are primarily my opinions. They're not necessarily the opinions of Elsevier, so don't quote me or quote the session and say, well, Elsevier thinks or Elsevier said this. These are really my opinions. So this first slide shows manuscript submissions, period 2003 to 2013. And you don't have to furiously write all of this down. I think you will have access to the slides and maybe audio recording after this. So don't feel compelled to write down every detail that you see here on these slides. But these data, or these pie charts, are based on Scholar 1, which is the Thomson Reuters manuscript submission and tracking system, looking at submissions from these countries. And as you can see, in 2003, China really represented only about 5% of submissions to journals that are on Scholar 1. And in 2013, they're projecting that China papers will represent 32%. You can also see some of the growth in other regions or other countries as well. If there are any other growth opportunities that you're looking at for other countries, this is a good slide to take a look at. This graph is taken from our Scopus database at Elsevier, and Scopus is our abstracting and indexing database, which competes with the other commonly available databases like Thomson Reuters, JCR. So what this is showing is the global article output during this 10-year period. And as you can see, that pink or magenta line represents China, and you're seeing tremendous growth in the share of global articles. And obviously, trends don't continue in that straight linear fashion, but we're projecting that by 2013 that China's output will equal the U.S.'s output for journal articles. Might be a little bit difficult to see, but again, this is from our Scopus data starting in 1996. This is how far back our data is most reliable in Scopus. And it's just showing across broad subject categories the growth in output. So you can see tremendous growth in the physical sciences there, relatively flat growth in social sciences, and good growth in life sciences and the health sciences. So on this slide, there's a lot of underlying data that represents this graph, and we have data by specialty, specific disciplines. So I thought I would share some of those data points with you. And this is paper output based on compound annual growth rates. What we have seen over this 15-year period is that papers in economics and finance have the highest compound annual growth rate, CAGR, for this period, followed by veterinary science. However, you have to keep in mind that the number of papers is relatively low, very low in these specialties. Chemistry, material science, physics, mathematics, and computer science have much lower CAGRs. However, keep in mind that the output in the number of papers for these disciplines is much, much higher. The highest article output has been in engineering, with approximately 80,000 papers published in 2010, and again, this is from our Scopus data. Physics and astronomy output was approximately 48,000 papers, and that's followed by material science, about 45,000 papers. So this is tough to see. There's this dotted line. This is measuring article impact, and again, these data are from Scopus. So that dotted line at 1 represents sort of this field-weighted relative impact. And to help you understand what that means, let's just say that if the world average for the number of citations received for organic chemistry papers is 2 citations per paper, and we looked at the average for Chinese papers published in organic chemistry, and we found that Chinese papers receive about 1.8 citations per article, then the Chinese papers would have a relative field-weighted relative impact of 0.9, which indicates that the papers coming from China in that field the impact is lower than the world average. So this is just an easy way to understand or see how these different broad categories of science and specialties rank versus the world average in terms of impact. And as you can see, and this is based on a 5-year rolling window. So if you looked at 2010, that is going to represent papers that are published between 2006 and 2010. And as you can see that for the social sciences, those papers are having actually greater impact in terms of citations than some of the other disciplines listed there: life sciences, physical sciences, and health sciences. And when we look at this by specific category or discipline, papers in economics and finance are actually above the field-weighted relative impact of 1. Those papers score about 1.1. And decision sciences, again, over 1. Psychology, over 1. And oddly enough, dentistry is about 1 as well. So what are the author motivations for publishing? I think they're pretty much the same as the rest of the world. Authors in China want to get promoted. And this, unfortunately, does lead to some of the issues that I think many of you who are involved in journals publishing see in terms of ethics violations or salami publications or plagiarism. And One of the things to remember is that, in academic institutions, often the individuals who are evaluating a faculty member or a researcher for promotion are bureaucrats. And so these bureaucrats are going to measure someone's potential for promotion based on the quantity of papers that they've published rather than the quality of papers. That's changing, and I'll talk about some of those changes and some initiatives in China that reflect a move to quality. Where to publish? I think this is, again, pretty much the same globally. Impact factor is the #1 criterion for which journal to choose to submit papers. Other considerations, obviously, would be the scope of the journal as well as review time and any associated publishing fees. So if your journal has very high author charges associated with it, that might be a deterrent for some Chinese authors to submit their paper. As I mentioned before, the reward system in China does lead to misconduct. And I don't want to focus on ethics issues in China. I certainly don't believe, and again, this is my opinion, that any ethics issues or violations that we're seeing from authors in China is any kind of nefarious. It's just something that I think a lot of Chinese authors still are learning and don't quite understand about the quality expectations for journals. So again, obviously you know probably some of these ethics violations and instances of misconduct. But I think what's most important here to remember and take away is that there are significant reform efforts being made in China, because China does see this as a stain on their country, basically. So we have personal crusaders at universities who are trying to stamp out ethics violations, who are trying to educate researchers at their institutions, who are in some cases being very heavy-handed and stripping individuals of faculty positions and promotions when they do find instances of violations. Universities are conducting ethics courses and ethics investigations. The government, in fact, is instituting programs to educate as well as to police ethics violations. Something that Laura said in terms of China's move from sort of a heavy industries, low manufacturing economy to one that's a high-tech economy that's based on science and research and development. It's very important to the Chinese government that their science that's being published is of high quality and is a reflection of the research and development that's taking place in China. Because ultimately, if China decides to export their technologies, they're going to a world market that may associate the quality of their research and scholarly output with the quality of their technology. So it is very important for the Chinese government to improve quality of papers. So this is something that Laura mentioned. The GAP is the sole government agency that regulates not only journal and STM publishing, but also internet publication and news, magazines, etc. And only GAP can grant publication licenses for books and periodicals. So keep in mind that if you have any aspirations or thoughts of distributing a local edition of a periodical through the Chinese postal system, you cannot do that without a GAP publication license. So you can do so if you partner with a local Chinese publisher who does happen to have a publication license and can be assigned to your local edition. Otherwise, the other option, and I'm speaking for local editions of journals, is primarily distribution through an industry sales force. So it would be a sponsored type of publication. Laura also mentioned new reforms, and In 2009, GAP set timelines for privatizing and privatization of the publishing industry, and they released these sets of opinions, not so much opinions as they are actual probably marching orders, identifying key areas for reform. And I'm not going to read all of these points verbatim, but it really is all about, I think, making their largest publishers successful and competitive on a global stage. So, as Laura mentioned, some of the larger publishers are going to have to find capital in the capital markets. Could be stock listings, it could be investment from venture capital. And I wouldn't be surprised to see in the near future Chinese publishers competing against some of the major commercial publishers for acquisition and partnership opportunities for any publishers that are available for sale or looking for investment. And obviously, key point here is the Chinese government wants to see its publishers deepen their partnerships globally, look for joint ventures and other areas of cooperation. And I think we're seeing that. Recently at the London Book Fair, there were some major announcements. For example, Wolters Kluwer announcing that they have expanded their cooperation with a major Chinese publisher. We have technology vendors that are announcing major partnerships with Chinese publishers to get Chinese language content as well as out into the global market, as well as to improve online delivery of content for Chinese publishers. And I think that's only going to increase as China modernizes its publishing industry. And another opportunity that I see perhaps is looking for talent. Chinese publishers perhaps looking for Western talent from individuals who have experience in a modern publishing company. There's definitely a talent gap in China that does need to be filled. So is publishing a pillar industry? And what do I mean by pillar industry? Well, traditionally, pillar industries in China have been associated with heavy industries or the military, could be mining. Pillar industry is one that's specifically targeted to boost the economy of China, both short-term and long-term. And what's interesting is in the recent 12th five-year plan, and China likes to issue these five-year plans, culture was mentioned or designated as a pillar industry, and culture includes media and publishing. So this is just an excerpt from the China Daily news article back in February, and I think it's a reflection or indication that China is going to be supporting its publishing industry and trying to grow that industry. And here's some evidence, early evidence actually. People's Medical Publishing House, and I think many of you in this room probably know about this, but they acquired B.C. Decker's medical and dental book list back in 2008, and they actually appointed a U.S. publishing veteran from McGraw-Hill to run that U.S. program. And again, to emphasize, I think many large publishers in China are going to look for opportunities and position themselves for growth globally as well as mergers and acquisitions. This just gives you an overview of what's happening with many of these formerly government-sponsored and government-supported publishers. Basically, except for 4 nonprofit and 26 army presses, all remaining 453 formerly government-supported publishers are now for-profit companies. University presses and institutional publishers now need to sustain themselves financially. So these publishers, their focus in the short term are going to be on challenges related to business models, ethics, quality, structure, things that we probably as publishers addressed 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So they're not going to be so interested in necessarily what are the coolest social media marketing opportunities for my publications, or how do I get my publications on tablets necessarily. The focus is going to be mostly on the basics. I thought this would be an interesting exercise here. So, in which country do you think these journals are published? I'll go for that first one. The International Journal of Agricultural and Biological Engineering. Anyone want to venture a guess? What session are we in? Yeah, it's China. This is an open access journal. It's from the Chinese Society of Agricultural Engineering and Association of Overseas Chinese Agricultural, Biological, and Food Engineers. How about the next one, pathology? This is a trick one. It's actually from Australia. It's not a Chinese journal. It's, Cell research. Cell research is based at the Shanghai Institute for Biological Sciences. It's co-published by Nature Publishing Group. It had a 2010 impact factor of 9.417. That's up from 8.151 in 2009. And it is ranked 21st out of 178 journals in the JCR cell biology category. So, I think that's a very interesting example of China's flight to quality in terms of improving their own journals, not only submitting to Western journals, but growing Chinese journals. Current Zoology is another example. Prior to 2009, Current Zoology was known as Acta Zoologica Sinica, and it's the second oldest journal in China. It's been published since 1935, and it's awaiting its first impact factor. Journal of Genetics and Genomics prior to 2007, that journal was known as Acta Genetica Sinica. It does have an impact factor that has grown. The neural regeneration research is supervised by the Ministry of Health, and it's sponsored by several prominent Chinese associations. And this last one, International Journal of Diabetes Mellitus, it's not from China, but I think it's interesting because, and this perhaps is a topic for another SSP conference, this journal is from Saudi Arabia, and a lot of journals are emerging and being published out of the Middle East now as well. In 2010, Thomson Reuters JCR indexed over 140 journals published in China. That's up from 50 in 2000. So you have to think long term. What's going to happen in China in the next 25 years, not what's going to happen in China the next quarter or next year. And this is just a graphical representation of the number of JCR indexed journals from China. So the darker blue bar is from the Science Citation Index, and the lighter blue is from JCR SSCI. So just to wrap up my presentation, talking about and building on what Laura said, in this 12th five-year plan that was announced in March, China identified 7 emerging industries, alternative energy, and so obviously we've seen China's domination now of solar panel manufacturing, biotechnology, drugs and medical devices. China wants to transform itself from becoming an import-based economy for drugs and medical devices and transform itself into actually an export economy, and one that's less dependent on foreign manufactured pharmaceuticals and devices. So there are a number of medical device companies in China that are receiving significant venture capital investment. A major orthopedics company that's actually competing with the largest orthopedics device companies in the world. A lot of activity in clinical trials and basic R&D. So if you just went on Google and did a search to see investment in China by the pharmaceutical industry, you can find a lot of different announcements and press releases. IT obviously is significant and important for China. High-end equipment manufacturing, especially in aerospace and telecom, and China is trying to develop its own aerospace industry. A lot of challenges there. Advanced materials, obviously, that's important for high-tech manufacturing, clean energy vehicles, and then finally energy conservation and environmental protection. That concludes my presentation. Adrian, do you want to open it up for questions?
I mean, if anybody's got a couple of quick questions, we've got some great presenters who are going to even drill further down into China. So I don't know, do you want to, any quick questions for David or Laura while I get the next Norm? Yeah.
We're talking about the pharmaceutical industry in China.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any merger activity, for example, purchase of other companies from other countries?
Yeah. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. I would say, from what I've seen, and this is from internal business intelligence at Elsevier, we have resources that cover the pharmaceutical medical device industry. That, yeah, absolutely, we're seeing the major multinational companies, the Pfizers, the AstraZenecas, partnering with early stage drug companies in China, whether it's investments. It's primarily investment in supporting research and gaining rights to those compounds that ultimately could make it to market. And I think someone else mentioned, the not necessarily the flight of Chinese brain power back to China from Western countries, but there is certainly an initiative in place by the Chinese government to attract their knowledge researchers, knowledge workers back to China, and they're supporting them and incentivizing them to do a lot of basic research.
Norm, I'll just add to that. We do a number of sort of sponsored reprint sales with the pharmaceutical companies, and right now the majority of purchasers of that content of translated articles to distribute locally is the big multinationals, but there really is a growing level now of Chinese companies who are understanding that market and developing. I don't think they're quite there yet at purchasing the same sort of a reprint article to distribute, but the level of research and work they're doing is getting up there on a par. We've noticed a growing number of those.